the distorted feminine, there's an inner sense of emptiness and unworthiness, a sense of lack, a sense of hollowness, a sense of brittleness. And with that, there is a yearning for fullness. The yearning comes with a sense that I need to fill myself up from the outside. So we instead of turning our attention inwards to self-soothe and to self-source all of the things that we need, we turn our attention outwards. And we try to get our needs met through the outside world because it's like this hollow cup inside. And it's almost like this cup has a hole in it. So no matter how much love or abundance comes pouring in, it just pulls out around our feet and we're empty again, always seeking more and more and more. I'm Madeline Eliza. Join me to explore female power, embodied leadership, sensuality and spirituality as we weave together ancient and modern, the scientific and the mythic, the erotic and the divine. Hello and welcome to the show. Today our topic is the hollow queen, which is a phrase that's used to describe some of the traits of the distorted feminine. So we hear a lot about the toxic masculine in our society and these kind of distorted models of masculinity, but it's problematic because we've almost come to understand that all masculinity is toxic, like masculinity is inherently toxic, and of course it is not. And then by virtue of that, then all femininity must be inherently a positive thing. And this is also untrue. And in this big conversation that's happening at the moment about reclaiming the feminine, I think it's really important to distinguish between healthy and distorted versions of both masculine and feminine energy. There are lots of elements of the distorted feminine which are all around us all the time, and they can be a little bit sneaky and a little bit hard to spot in others and in ourselves. And it's not something that we talk about culturally as much as we talk about toxic masculinity, right? Like we don't hear the phrase toxic femininity very often. I'm sure if you do a Google search for each of those terms, you'll find many, many, many more entries on toxic masculinity than toxic femininity. But I'm interested to unpack this because this archetype of the hollow queen holds so much power. And when we can make the implicit explicit and start to see that which might not have been visible to us before and the ways that these kind of constricting patterns can show up in our own lives, it gives us so much more power and agency to step into a more healthy version of femininity and to look at the areas where we maybe have a little bit of work to do. This is a part of a bigger conversation around personal responsibility, which is a very big theme for me in my work. There's a saying that you can't be a victim and a master at the same time. Like you have to choose. And one of the things that I talk about a lot with feminism and this conversation around female empowerment is that we're often viewing the situation through a victimhood lens and not really looking at the ways that we can each claim our own personal power without being reliant on anyone or anything else or any external system changes. In most cases, there is more power available for each of us to take up that we're not fully claiming. Like we haven't fully stretched our wings because of these internal blocks and these internal limiting beliefs. And once we fully stretch our wings and take up all the space that is available to us, then we're so much more empowered to go out into the world and to drive system change and to pursue those causes and those objectives that really matter the most to us. I really passionately believe that when we do the inner work first, we arrive in a much stronger and more integral place to go out and do our best work in the world. So this is very much about personal responsibility. And some of the themes we're going to talk about today may be a little bit triggering because when we start to look at our own wounds and the way that we're holding ourselves back, it can bring up some shame and some fear and some denial and some defensiveness. So it's interesting to look at though, because I think this is where true empowerment comes from. So if we start by looking at what is the distorted feminine, we're going to unpack that first and some really key traits of distorted feminine energy and the ways that it can show up in our lives. This is more from a spiritual perspective, I suppose. I've stumbled across this work through my studies in Tantra, and It also correlates to the nervous system though. So we're going to talk about that as well and a more neuroscience brain-body perspective on some of these archetypes of the Hollow Queen. We're then going to look at why this matters in a conversation around feminism and female empowerment, why we're having this conversation today, and what has it got to do with these bigger system changes that we see a lot of attention focused on. And we're then going to look at more healthy or divine feminine energy and how that contrasts with this archetype of the Hollow Queen. So to start with, this phrase, the Hollow Queen, when I first heard it, before I even knew anything about what it meant, there was like a deep recognition in my body of, I know what this is going to be about. Like, I know what that means, the Hollow Queen. It just is such a potent phrase, and that's why I'm using it for this episode, because I don't know if it hits you in the same way, but for me, as soon as I heard those words in a context of distorted feminine energy, it's like, I know what this is about. So I've talked about this kind of tantric perspective on the feminine quite a bit in the show, but feminine energy is about movement and flow, and the feminine actually yearns to be full. Like, this is the Shakti, fullness of everything, life force. And certainly the Hollow Queen yearns to be full. And in a healthy feminine expression, we fill ourselves up. We have a deep appreciation of our own self-worth. We're accepting of ourselves. We know how to contain and generate energy within our bodies. We get to a space where we have clear boundaries, but we are able to be open and receptive and trusting. Like, our energy is clear and kind of undamaged by these distortions that can come into play. We're able to be more playful. We're able to be more loving. We're able to express ourselves more fully in the world, because we're clear and clean inside of ourselves. And our energy is like this self-sustaining cup that just keeps refilling from the inside. So if we look at the Hollow Queen and start to unpack some of the traits of distorted feminine energy, rather than feeling full and knowing that that fullness comes from within, the distorted feminine has an inner sense of lack and emptiness, like a brittleness and a hollowness. And I'm going to use a lot of descriptive, slightly poetic phrases here, because I think some of these concepts are not, it's not something that you can cognitively process. It's like an experiential felt sense in the body. So the distorted feminine, there's an inner sense of emptiness and unworthiness, a sense of lack, a sense of hollowness, a sense of brittleness. And with that, there is a yearning for fullness. And I would say that that yearning is at the heart of the feminine experience. Like, to be feminine is to have this yearning and to have this heart that's longing to open and to deepen into love. So it's not that yearning is something that we need to squash or quell. It's part of our nature. And the more that we can get into a space of softness and surrender to that experience, the more empowered we are as women. But for this distorted feminine, the yearning comes with a sense that I need to fill myself up from the outside. So we instead of turning our attention inwards to self-soothe and to self-source all of the things that we need, we turn our attention outwards and we try to get our needs met through the outside world, because it's like this hollow cup inside, and it's almost like this cup has a hole in it. So no matter how much love or abundance comes pouring in, it just pulls out around our feet and we're empty again, always seeking more and more and more. In a previous episode, I've talked about the succubus as a feminine archetype, like this female demon that just devours all, and she's a sexual force. But this is a helpful archetype to have while we're having this conversation of the distorted feminine. She's looking to fill herself up from the outside in. So part of that is a constant seeking of approval and validation. And social media is a wonderful place where you can see this playing out day after day after day. This seeking of external validation. We seek this from our peers. We seek this from our networks on social media. We can seek this from our intimate partners as well, and from our friendships. When we don't have a strong sense of self and we're constantly trying to get a sense of ourself in relation to other people, it's really a losing battle. But this is part of this distorted feminine energy where we don't feel strong and we don't feel worthy. So we're outsourcing that all the time. We're looking for other people to tell us that we're worthy and to fill us up. But of course, we can never be full because our bucket is full of holes. Having this, along with this focus on external validation, comes an intense focus on appearance. And again, if the divine feminine is completely grounded in her inner beauty and she knows that her radiance comes from within, and it's an energetic practice more than about what skincare or what makeup she's using. So this is where codependency can come out to play as well. These really tricky relational dynamics that we can get caught up in the drama and in the projection, and we can forget to interrogate how we're contributing to it. So in service of this conversation around personal responsibility, I just want to bring that up to the light as well. I think codependency is such a big theme. With nervous system work, there's a fine line between co-regulation and codependency because, of course, we are relational creatures. We're not designed to be able to completely meet all of our own needs all the time. There are times when we need to lean on other people to help us regulate. But when we start to tip into codependency and those patterns of like being an energy vampire, it might be an indication that this distorted feminine energy is at play. The next one, which I think is really interesting, is competition. And this is less about how we relate to the masculine and more about how we relate to our sisters. And in a patriarchy, we are taught to view each other as competition. And it's a zero-sum game. So if you're winning, I'm losing. We can't all win. So this plays out so much in the corporate world, this kind of environment of undermining and backstabbing and competition and manipulation can come into play here as well. We can start to really seek status and esteem through this very patriarchal lens where we're climbing the corporate ladder and we're adhering to this mindset where we can't all win. And if I want to win, I need to keep you down. And we don't lift each other up. This is really where sister wounding comes from. So this sense of competition, this sense of other women as being a threat. And if you've ever looked at a woman who is maybe fully in her power, fully in her radiance, fully in her sensuality, who's unapologetic about herself, and you feel triggered and annoyed, this may be an indication that there's some sister wounding going on there, because in a healthy feminine dynamic, we're all able to support each other and lift each other up. We don't see another strong woman as a threat because we're not in that mindset of competition. And something else that's interesting with this conversation around sister wounding is that in this very treacherous field where we can't trust other women, we learn to shrink and to play small, because to be fully seen in our radiance is dangerous because other women are likely to be threatened by us and to attack us. And so we shrink and play small. And something that we do when we bond with other women is we bond through stories of victimhood. I really noticed this when I first became a mother, and we would sit in mothers' circles. And I was very fortunate. I had a very smooth, natural birth. And lots of other women obviously don't have that experience. But something that I noticed sitting in those circles is that it almost became shameful, or I didn't feel like I could speak to this incredible experience that I'd had giving birth, because it was really amazing and really empowering and kind of life-changing for me. But I didn't want to share that because there were so many other women who had had harder experiences, and I didn't want to make them feel bad. The kind of mode of bonding is often through talking about how hard things are. This happens all the time in motherhood as well. We bond over how tired we are and how much there is to do and how difficult it is. We don't often get together as a group of mothers and talk about how wonderful things are. We struggle sometimes to celebrate our own successes and the successes of our sisters because there's this tension all the time around not wanting to shine too brightly and be cast out of the group. Or if you're in that distorted feminine energy, any woman who is shining feels like a threat and a trigger. This is a really interesting area to explore. Something that I've been reflecting on is that as I have, I've done a lot of work the last few years in really expanding my capacity and stepping into my radiance and my power. And a beautiful gift of the masculine is that it has offered a safe space for me to do that. It's often been in relationship with the masculine that I have stretched my wings the most with male friends or lovers, where instead of there's no undercurrent of jealousy or threat or any of that kind of murky sister wound relational stuff that can be sitting under the surface in our relationships with women. With a healthy divine masculine, whether that's a friend or a lover or a father or a brother or whatever, when there's an invitation to express aspects of yourself as a woman and you get met with like, yeah, bring it, like show me, I want to see more, go, none of it's too much. There's a beautiful space that we can step into in relationship with the masculine, and I think that's a very beautiful gift that the masculine can offer the feminine. And when we get into right relationship with ourselves and we're in this healthy, grounded, centered, open, radiant feminine energy, we can offer that to other women as well. Like, go, show me. I want to see how bright you are. None of it is too much. I do this practice with my daughter because I grew up feeling like I had to shrink and it's taken me decades to cast it off. And I do this practice with my daughter where I say, show me your shine. I want to see how big it is, like give it all to me. And she gathers it up, rubs her hands together and gathers it up, and then she throws her hands outwards, and shines at me. And it brings me so much joy. And I think when we're in a space where we feel full and whole within ourselves, we can offer that to other women. And as you start to step into fullness and wholeness, I think you naturally magnetize people, women and men who are on your wavelength and who can hold you in that space. But while you're in a transitional space of stretching out your wings, maybe for the first time, and figuring out where those edges are, the masculine can offer a beautiful gift in holding and supporting that if it doesn't feel safe to do that with women in your life. I would also add that if it doesn't feel safe to do that with the women in your life, then there's maybe some unhealthy dynamics in those relationships that need to be looked at as well. So the final aspect of the distorted feminine, which I wanted to touch on today, is patterns of addiction and using other substances or behaviors to try and fill that sense of internal emptiness. This is so common in our society today as a whole, and it also relates to the nervous system, which is where I'm going next. But just to flesh out what some of these behaviors can look like, I think how we deal with food is a big one for so many women. Binge eating, overeating, emotional eating, having this relationship where we're using food not just as nutrition, but as emotional fuel to kind of fill that emptiness within. This is so common. Alcohol is another one. It's so normalized in our culture, and this idea of mummy wine time really gets under my skin. I think it's very problematic. We've normalized excess alcohol consumption, especially in Australia where I live. I've lived in the UK. It's the same kind of thing there, but it's kind of normal to binge drink many nights of the week. And often this is, again, filling this sense of internal emptiness. Drug addiction obviously would fall into this category as well. And also other things like binge watching Netflix or scrolling incessantly on your phone or shopping, whatever those activities are that are trying to fill that internal hole would fall under this bracket of addiction. And this relates to the nervous system. So I think always interested in places where the spirituality and the science converge. Polyvagal theory is really important to understand here. This is the work of Stephen Porges. So for a long time, if you've been to a yoga class and the teacher talks about the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system, it's like this binary construct. That's how we used to think about the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system. Stephen Porges' work introduced polyvagal theory, where we understand that there's the sympathetic nervous system, but the parasympathetic nervous system, which is governed by the vagus nerve, has two branches. It has the ventral vagal state, which is that kind of grounded, centered, relaxed, open, sociable state where we feel good and regulated and relatively calm. And then there's the dorsal vagal state, which is the state of shutdown and collapse. And this is kind of correlated with depression and shame and those kinds of really dense emotional experiences. So when your yoga teacher talks about dropping into the parasympathetic nervous system, they're talking about the ventral vagal state. The dorsal vagal state has been really not so well understood for a long time. And you can think of it as a three-state system where if the ventral vagal state is in the middle, regulated, this is kind of where we want to be, this is where we want to keep returning to. Then you've got the dorsal vagal state, which is hypoarousal. It's low energy, it's flat, collapsed. We're withdrawn, we have feelings of shame, despair, hopelessness, low energy, that kind of thing. Then on the other side, you have sympathetic arousal, which is fight or flight, racing thoughts, anxiety. We're all kind of familiar with that state. This is polyvagal theory, where we have these three states that we can move between. And Dan Siegel then built on this work with his framework called the window of tolerance. And this is an understanding that we each have a window. If we look at that ventral vagal state as the middle, we each have a window of tolerance where we can go a little bit outside our window. Maybe we have a stressful situation where we get cut off in traffic, or we're bombarded with emails at work, or we're doing dinner, bath and bed and our kids are screaming at us incessantly, and we go into this fight or flight mode, but we're able to regulate ourselves again. Or we're in grief, or something happens that triggers shame, or for some reason we go into that dorsal vagal state of collapse, but we're able to stay back within our window of tolerance. We can widen the window of tolerance, which is what it means to increase the capacity of your nervous system so that you can experience, for example, more stress and still maintain that ability to come back to homeostasis and regulation. When we get outside our window of tolerance is when we're feeling extremely dysregulated. And when we get stuck outside our window of tolerance for extended periods of time, for example, if you're in that fight or flight mode for weeks or months or years, which can happen to so many of us if we're working in the way that our society generally suggests that we should work. This has happened to me as well. And then you go crashing back down into burnout on the other side of the spectrum. But the window of tolerance is basically this flexible middle zone where you can move a little bit one way or the other, but come back to regulation. There's been some further work done on the faux window of tolerance, where we're able to artificially regulate ourselves, basically. And this is where these patterns of addiction come in. So, for example, you've had a busy day at work, you come home, you're feeling totally fried and frazzled, and your mind is looping and you can't shake it. And you know that you should go for a walk or do some exercise or do a meditation or something like that, but you're so jittery that you can't. And so instead you drink a glass and a half of wine while scrolling Instagram. And you feel a little bit calmer, but it's not actually bringing long-term regulation. It's kind of just putting a Band-Aid on the situation. This is what's known as the faux window of tolerance. And I'll link to all the research papers and books in the show notes on this. So these patterns of addiction and trying to fill ourselves up externally that we see in the distorted feminine, that's more of a spiritual framework, are also backed up by the neuroscience, because we know that these behavioral patterns, and you can do this if you're in the dorsal vagal state, if you're in that hypoarousal, we can artificially regulate ourselves by having 6 cups of coffee. we can push ourselves up or down, but these don't actually bring true lasting regulation. And over time, these types of patterns tend to make the problem worse rather than better. So I just wanted to offer that nervous system perspective in addition to this more spiritual framework of the Hollow Queen, because there's so much overlap and so much correlation there. Okay, so moving on to a conversation about feminism and female empowerment, and why does any of this even matter? Something I notice in conversations about female empowerment is that the attention is often focused outwardly, whether that's on workplace policy or changing our legal system. For example, there's often a lot of attention focused outwards, and it comes from this heated kind of angry place. That's important work as well. We live in a system that for generations and generations and centuries has oppressed women, and where we've been second-class citizens, and it has been a fight to get to this place where in the Western world we enjoy a lot of comparative freedom now. So this is not a binary this or that. This is non-dual thinking, where we acknowledge that yes, this system change work is important, and there is also inner work that we can each do to claim more power here. And this is the space where I work. And I'm interested in it because I think it's empowering, because it's something that we each have agency over. We don't need anyone outside of ourselves to hand us power on a plate. We don't need to fight for it with any external forces. We can actually open the lid on this stuff inside of ourselves and unlock drastically new levels of energy and empowerment and vitality and radiance within our own bodies. This is about personal responsibility. I've spent a lot of time hunting out all the places that victimhood hides in my psyche, and I think this can be a lifelong journey. But certainly looking at what do I have agency over and what can I control? Like where can I create massive ripples of change within my own life without needing anyone else? This is a really empowering place to start. And I would offer, if you're a feminist who in the next breath is hating on yourself, feeling disconnected from your body, not feeling a sense of aliveness and vitality and health in your body, carrying shame and fear around maybe the darker, wilder aspects of yourself, like you haven't integrated that. There's shadowy parts in you that you're scared of and that you're running from. If you're not fully grounded in your sexuality and your eros energy, there's an invitation to turn inside and to reclaim all of that power first, and then go out and do your best work out in the world. If you're a feminist who in the next breath is hating on other women and engaging in this kind of backstabbing, individualistic, I'm going to climb to the top of the corporate ladder because that's what patriarchy has taught me to do. I'm feeling so triggered by this woman who's flaunting her radiance and her sensuality. I don't like it when my friends talk about their successes because it makes me feel insecure and threatened. Like if there's that kind of pattern of sister wounding going on, then there's inner work to be done. If you're a feminist who is hating on men, which we see all the time, we're pointing the finger at men, we're blaming men for all of the problems of the world, we're talking about toxic masculinity, we're not in a place of deep reverence and respect and devotion with the men in our own lives, and yet we're calling ourselves a feminist, then you're coming from a place of victimhood and you're not fully empowered, and there is inner work to be done. So these are all like warning signs that we've got our attention focused on the exterior world, but actually there's this interior work that I would argue should be done first, or in conjunction with the external system change work. But if we're out there fighting for system change and trying to have our biggest, brightest impact in the world, before we've fully integrated and claimed all of our own power inside our own bodies, then we're not able to have as big an impact as we could otherwise. And we're not coming from a place of true integrity. So I'm always going to offer this slightly challenging perspective that we should be turning our attention inwards first rather than clamoring outwards for system change. I think there's so much exciting, potent capacity inside each of us when we're brave enough to lift the rocks and look underneath. So to finish with, I just wanted to touch on, again, I've touched on some of this already, but some of these traits of healthy or divine feminine energy in contrast to the hollow queen. We've looked at the distorted feminine who doesn't feel full and radiant and validated inside of herself, and so she's looking outwards to fill herself up all the time. The healthy, mature, divine feminine, in contrast, knows that it's her job to fill herself up, and she can do that, and she is good at doing that. She has a sense of inner fullness, of inner self-worth, of inner radiance. There's like a sense of energetic containment, like there's a well of energy that's constantly regenerating, and you can hold it inside of your body. This is a little bit esoteric, and I offer this from my own experience. I think for a lot of years I felt like no matter how much energy I generated, it was just leaking out on the ground around me because I wasn't able to hold it. And this is what I mean about your bucket being empty. If you're trying to fill yourself up from the outside, but the bucket has a hole in it, you're never going to feel full. So when you get to this space of healthy femininity, you're full and contained within yourself. And a lot of that has to do with boundaries, actually. That's certainly part of this, is having clear, strong, healthy boundaries. The healthy feminine archetype has a sense of inner beauty and radiance. We know that this comes from within. We might enjoy wearing makeup and getting dressed up, but we know that's not the source of our beauty. And we know that our beauty comes from within. There's a sense of acceptance and maturity, whichever archetypal phase we're in, whether we're in the maiden or the mother or the crone, we're just fully embodied in that phase of life. We're not perpetually trying to wrestle our way back to maidenhood and to youth, and to be in this constant anti-aging cycle that we can see with the more distorted feminine energy. We are connected to and have an experience of ourselves as being just flooded with divine love for self, love for our family, love for our friends, love for our community, love for this planet and humanity. Love is a really integral part of the feminine experience. And this is part of what has us feeling full, that we're just tapped in. It's like individuating in order to connect to the source or the broader energy field, or whatever your spiritual beliefs are. There's so many different frameworks for understanding this sense of that we are all part of a unified energy field. The other thing we'll notice with healthy feminine expression is that there's expression. We're fully expressed. We've cleared the blocks. We're in this space of love and heart opening. We're soft and receptive. And from that space, we can fully express our gifts. There's no fear. There's no sense of contraction. There's no sense of competition. We're free to fully express our gifts and to self-actualize, which is arguably the greatest thing that any of us could do in this lifetime, is to really discover our purpose and bring that forth into this world. If you'd like to go deeper into this work, I have a free ebook on my website. It's called From Hollow to Whole, and it's really diving into this archetype of the hollow queen and looking at some of the traits we've talked about today, but also looking at some practices and practical steps that you can take to start to reclaim your fullness as a woman, moving from this space of brittleness and contraction to moving to a space of fullness and radiance, so that you can express your brightest gifts in this lifetime. So that's on my website at madelineeliza.com/whole, WHOLE, and I'll pop the link in the show notes for you as well. Love to see you here next time. Thanks for joining me, and have a beautiful day.